Most of us grew up believing that science is about answers. You open a book, you memorize a fact, you pass a test, and you feel safe. Gravity pulls things down. Atoms make matter. Light has a speed limit. Question asked. Answer given. Case closed. But what if that picture is completely wrong? What if the most important thing science ever did was not to give answers at all, but to teach us how to doubt the questions we thought were obvious? That's where Richard Feynman quietly changes everything. Because if you really listen to him, not the quotes on posters, not the dramatic clips, but the way he actually thinks, you notice something strange. He almost never sounds certain. He laughs at his own explanations. He interrupts himself. He says things like, "I don't know," and then keeps going anyway. And that's the point. Feynman never gave answers. He changed the question. Let me start with something simple. You might think you're sitting still right now. Your body feels calm. The room feels quiet. The floor feels solid. It feels like rest. But are you really still? The earth is spinning beneath you faster than a jet plane. The planet is racing around the sun. The sun is moving through the galaxy. The galaxy itself is drifting through a vast ocean of other galaxies. And inside your body, atoms are buzzing, shaking, colliding, never stopping for a single moment. So when you say, "I am at rest," what do you actually mean? Rest compared to what? That's a Feynman-style question. Not what is the answer, but what are we really asking? He loved to pull the rug out from under ordinary words. Words like motion, words like cause, words like explanation. Because once you look closely, those words start to wobble. Take a simple question. Why does a magnet pull a piece of metal? Most people expect an answer like a machine manual. They want a hidden gear, a tiny rope, some invisible hand pulling things together. But Feynman would stop you and say, "Wait, why are you satisfied with that kind of answer?" If I say, "Because of a magnetic field," have I explained anything, or have I just replaced one mystery with another word? You see, saying the word doesn't dissolve the confusion. It just hides it, and that's where textbooks often lie to us, not intentionally, but by giving us the feeling that naming something is the same as understanding it. Feynman refused to let that slide. He would ask again and again, "What do you mean by that?" And then, "Why do you think that explains anything?" That kind of questioning can feel uncomfortable. It can feel like the ground is slipping away. But that discomfort is exactly where real understanding begins. Because reality does not care about our comfort. One of the strangest things about the universe is that it doesn't behave the way our everyday intuition wants it to. We want causes that look like pushes and pulls. We want explanations that look like gears turning. We want the universe to behave like a machine we could fix with a wrench. But it doesn't. At the smallest scales, things don't sit still. They don't follow neat paths. They don't wait politely for us to measure them. They behave more like a blur, more like a dance, more like a restless conversation than a set of instructions. And instead of pretending this makes sense, Feynman leaned into the weirdness. He didn't say, "Here's the answer, now stop thinking." He said, "Isn't this strange? Let's look again." That attitude changes everything. Because once you accept that the universe does not owe you an intuitive explanation, you become free. Free to explore without demanding comfort. Free to be curious instead of certain. Think about how children ask questions. A child doesn't ask to sound smart. They ask because something doesn't sit right in their mind. They ask why again and again. Not because they want the final answer, but because each answer opens a new gap. Feynman never lost that. Most adults do. Somewhere along the way, we learn that not knowing is embarrassing. We learn that uncertainty looks weak. So we trade curiosity for confidence. Feynman did the opposite. He treated uncertainty as a feature, not a flaw. He understood that science is not a collection of truths. It's a process of refining better and better questions. And here's the part that really shakes people. Even when science works perfectly, even when it predicts things with stunning accuracy, it still doesn't tell us what reality really is. It tells us what happens. It tells us what we observe. It tells us what patterns repeat. But the moment you ask, "Why is it this way and not some other way?" the universe goes quiet. And that silence is not a failure. It's a clue. It means we've reached the edge of what explanation can do. Feynman was comfortable living at that edge. He once said that nature has imagination far greater than ours. That should humble us, because every time we think we've nailed reality down, it surprises us. Every time we say, "Now we understand," a deeper question opens up underneath. Why does the universe follow rules at all? Why does it exist instead of not exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? No equation answers that. No formula resolves it. And Feynman never pretended otherwise. Instead, he showed us a different kind of honesty. He showed us that it's okay to say, "This is how it behaves, and we don't know why." That sentence is not a weakness. It's one of the strongest sentences science can offer. Because it leaves room for wonder. And wonder is not childish. It's essential. Without wonder, science becomes a dead list of facts. With wonder, it becomes a living conversation with reality. Think about how dangerous certainty can be. When you believe you already have the answer, you stop listening, you stop questioning, you stop noticing the cracks. But when you admit you might be wrong, the universe starts talking again. Feynman understood that deeply. He knew that progress doesn't come from defending answers. It comes from attacking questions, and not gently, relentlessly, playfully, with joy. He would take a question apart, flip it upside down, laugh at it, and then ask a better one. Not to destroy understanding, but to deepen it. That's why his style feels so alive even decades later. He's not preaching, he's thinking. And thinking is contagious. You start listening, and suddenly you're thinking too. You start wondering about things you thought were settled. Why does time only move forward? Why can't we remember the future? Why does cause come before effect? Or is that just how our minds work? Are these laws of the universe? Or laws of how humans experience the universe? That distinction matters, because it reminds us that we are part of the system we're trying to understand. We are not outside observers looking in. We are participants. Our brains evolved to throw rocks, find food, and avoid danger. They were not designed to understand the deep structure of reality. So the fact that reality sometimes feels strange is not surprising at all. What's surprising is that it makes sense at all. Feynman never forgot that miracle. He approached physics with gratitude, not arrogance. He knew that every explanation is a translation, and every translation loses something. So instead of claiming to possess truth, he treated truth as something you circle around, never fully grasping. That attitude doesn't make science weaker. It makes it stronger, because it builds in humility. And humility keeps you honest in a world obsessed with certainty. That's revolutionary. Now here's the part that connects this to your life, not just physics. We often demand answers from life the same way we demand them from textbooks. Why did this happen to me? What is the purpose of this struggle? Where is this all going? And when we don't get clean answers, we feel cheated. But what if the mistake is the question? What if life, like the universe, is not an answer machine? What if meaning doesn't arrive as a final statement, but as something you explore through better and better questions? Feynman's mindset applies far beyond science. It teaches us to stay curious instead of rigid, to stay playful instead of defensive, to stay honest instead of pretending we know. And that kind of thinking is rare, because it requires courage. It's easier to memorize answers than to live with uncertainty. It's easier to repeat conclusions than to sit with confusion. But growth lives in confusion. Discovery lives in confusion. Every major shift in understanding began with someone saying, "I don't think we're asking the right question." That sentence is dangerous. It disrupts comfort. It challenges authority. It invites chaos. But it also opens doors no one knew were there. Feynman walked through those doors with a grin, not because he thought he was special, but because he trusted curiosity more than certainty. And maybe that's the deepest lesson he left us. The universe is not a puzzle waiting for a final solution. It's a mystery inviting endless exploration. You don't conquer it, you dance with it. You don't extract answers from it, you learn how to ask better questions of it. And the moment you stop demanding closure, something remarkable happens. You feel lighter, because you realize that not knowing is not a failure. It's the natural state of an honest mind. So the next time someone asks you for a simple answer about the universe or life or meaning, maybe you don't rush to respond. Maybe you pause, maybe you smile, and maybe you say something very Feynman-like. That's a good question. But before we answer it, let's make sure we're asking the right one. And then you keep thinking, because the thinking never really ends. And that's not a problem. That's the point. Once you really accept this idea, that questions matter more than answers, something strange happens inside your head. You start noticing how often we confuse explanation with comfort. We don't actually want to understand something deeply. We want it to stop bothering us. Think about how often someone asks, "Why is the sky blue?" If you give a short, technical answer, most people nod and move on. Not because they understand, but because the discomfort is gone. The itch has been scratched just enough. Feynman hated that kind of satisfaction. He knew that real understanding doesn't feel like relief. It feels like curiosity expanding. It feels like the question getting bigger, not smaller. When you truly understand something, you don't feel finished. You feel invited. Invited to look closer. Invited to doubt your intuition. Invited to admit that the universe is smarter than your common sense. And common sense, by the way, is one of the most dangerous tools we have. It works beautifully at human scale. Chairs hold us, fire burns, time moves forward. But the moment you step outside everyday experience, common sense starts lying to you. Feynman understood that common sense is local. Reality is not. At small scales, things don't behave like solid objects. At large scales, space itself bends and stretches. At fast speeds, time refuses to behave normally. And instead of saying, "This is nonsense," Feynman said, "Maybe my intuition is the problem." That's a radical move. Most people trust their intuition more than reality. Feynman trusted reality more than his intuition. That's why he could say things that sounded shocking, but were actually humble. He didn't say, "I understand the universe." He said, "I'm trying to understand it, and it keeps surprising me." Surprise was not an enemy to him. It was evidence that he was learning. Now think about how education usually works. We train students to repeat correct answers. We reward certainty. We punish hesitation. But Feynman believed that hesitation is where thinking lives. He believed that a student who says, "I'm not sure, but here's what I think," is closer to truth than someone who confidently repeats words they don't understand. Because understanding is not stored in words. It's stored in relationships between ideas. You can memorize a sentence about how the universe works and still have no mental picture of what it means. Feynman constantly tried to rebuild those pictures from scratch, using simple language, silly analogies, and everyday experiences. Not because he was dumbing things down, but because he was stripping away fake understanding. If you can't explain something simply, it usually means you don't understand it deeply. Or worse, you understand it only through symbols and labels. Feynman didn't respect labels. He respected insight. He once made a powerful point by talking about birds. A child learns that a bird is called different names in different languages. But knowing the name doesn't tell you how the bird flies, how it eats, how it survives, how it behaves. Names are convenient. They are not explanations. Physics, to Feynman, was not about learning the universe's vocabulary. It was about learning its behavior, and behavior is subtle. The universe doesn't tell us what it is. It shows us what it does, and even then, only partially. That's why Feynman was deeply suspicious of people who claimed final answers. The moment someone says, "This is the ultimate truth," curiosity dies. Final answers are intellectual dead ends, but open questions are alive. Now let's turn the mirror around. How often do we do this to ourselves? We say, "This is who I am. This is how life works. This is how things always go." And once we say that, we stop observing. But what if those are just answers we memorized about ourselves? What if we never questioned the question? Feynman's mindset doesn't just apply to atoms and stars. It applies to identity, purpose, and meaning. Who are you, really? Are you the labels you've collected? The job title? The past mistakes? The expectations placed on you? Or are those just convenient names we use to avoid deeper uncertainty? Feynman would probably smile and say, "Be careful. Names can trap you, because once you name something, you think you own it. And once you think you own it, you stop exploring it. The universe resists ownership. It doesn't belong to us. It doesn't conform to our language. It doesn't care about our need for closure. And that's strangely comforting. It means you don't have to have it all figured out. You're allowed to live in the question. In fact, that might be the most honest way to live." Feynman once emphasized that science is built on doubt, not belief. That sounds backwards to many people. We think belief is strong and doubt is weak, but doubt is active. Belief is often passive. Doubt pushes you to test, to observe, to question again. Belief settles you into certainty. Science advances because it assumes it might be wrong. That's a powerful lesson. Imagine what would happen if we applied that attitude to our conversations, our politics, our relationships, our inner dialogue. What if being wrong wasn't shameful but expected? What if changing your mind was a sign of strength, not weakness? Feynman changed his mind constantly, not because he was confused, but because he was honest. He followed evidence wherever it led, even if it contradicted his previous thinking. That kind of flexibility is rare. Most people defend their conclusions as if their identity depends on them. Feynman defended curiosity, and curiosity has no ego. Curiosity doesn't need to win, it needs to learn. Now here's something subtle but important. Feynman didn't reject beauty or meaning. He deepened them. Some people worry that science makes the universe cold and mechanical. Feynman argued the opposite. He said knowing more makes things more beautiful, not less. A flower is not less beautiful because you understand how it works. It's more beautiful. The same is true of the universe. Understanding that reality is strange, incomplete, and open-ended doesn't drain it of wonder. It fills it with wonder. Because now every answer is provisional. Every explanation is temporary. Every discovery opens 10 new mysteries. That's not disappointing. That's infinite. And suddenly, life doesn't feel like a test you're failing. It feels like a conversation you're part of. You don't need to rush to the end. There is no final page. There is just deeper listening, deeper questioning, and deeper appreciation for how little we truly know, and how miraculous it is that we know anything at all. So, if you ever feel overwhelmed by not having answers, remember this. The greatest physicist of the modern era was comfortable saying, "I don't know," not as an excuse, but as an invitation to keep looking, to keep asking, to keep wondering, because the moment you stop demanding certainty, the universe becomes a lot more interesting. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real explanation Feynman left us. Not an answer, but a way of thinking that never stops. So where does all of this finally leave us? If Feynman never gave answers, if he kept changing the question, if certainty was never the goal, then what was he really offering us? Not confusion, not chaos, but intellectual honesty. He was showing us that reality is not something you conquer, it's something you participate in. Most of us grow up believing that knowledge is a collection. You gather facts, stack them neatly, and one day you arrive at understanding. But Feynman knew that's not how it works. Understanding is not a pile of answers. It's a living process. It's something that moves. The moment you stop questioning, understanding freezes, and frozen understanding eventually becomes wrong. That's why Feynman treated the universe like a dance partner, not a puzzle with a final solution. You don't dominate a dance, you respond, you adjust, you listen. And sometimes you step on each other's toes, but that's part of it. This is why he was never embarrassed by uncertainty. To him, uncertainty wasn't a gap to be filled. It was the natural state of an honest mind. He once said that it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to live with answers that might be wrong. Think about how radical that is. We spend our lives chasing certainty, believing it will make us safe. But certainty often makes us rigid. Uncertainty keeps us alive. Look at the universe itself. Nothing is fixed. Everything vibrates, shifts, evolves. Stars are born and die. Galaxies collide. Even empty space is restless. Why would our understanding be any different? The mistake we make is assuming that not knowing means failing. Feynman flipped that idea upside down. He showed us that not knowing is the starting point of all discovery. Every breakthrough in physics began with someone saying something doesn't make sense. Not I have the answer, but I'm confused. Confusion is fertile ground. And this doesn't just apply to science, it applies to life. How many times do we pretend to understand things we don't? How often do we accept explanations just because they sound confident? We say things like, that's just how the world works, when what we really mean is, I've stopped questioning. Feynman would gently warn you there, because the world doesn't just work one way. It behaves in ways that are subtle, layered, and often counterintuitive. And the moment you think you've fully captured it in words, it slips through your fingers. That's not failure. That's reality reminding you to stay curious. One of the most beautiful things about Feynman was his childlike wonder. Not childishness, wonder. The ability to look at something familiar and still be amazed. A spinning plate, a drop of water, a beam of light. He never lost the feeling that existence itself is strange. Most adults lose that feeling early. We replace wonder with routine. We stop asking why and start saying because. But Feynman never outgrew that phase. He protected it. And maybe that's the quiet lesson here. You don't need to be a physicist to think like Feynman. You just need the courage to admit when you don't understand something, and the patience to sit with that discomfort, to resist fake clarity, to resist borrowed certainty, to resist answers that end the conversation. Instead, ask better questions. Not questions that seek closure, but questions that open doors. Not what is the final truth, but what might I be missing? Not who is right, but what evidence would change my mind. Not what should I believe, but what is actually happening. That way of thinking changes everything. It makes you humbler. It makes you sharper. And strangely, it makes the universe feel more meaningful, not less. Because now meaning isn't handed to you, you participate in discovering it. Feynman once said that nature has a greater imagination than we do, and that's comforting. It means reality is richer than our explanations, deeper than our models, bigger than our certainty. We are explorers, not owners. And the most honest thing an explorer can say is, I don't know what's ahead, but I'm curious. So if there's one thing to take away from all of this, let it be this. Don't be afraid of unanswered questions. Be afraid of unasked ones. Because the moment you stop questioning, you stop learning. And the moment you stop learning, the universe goes quiet. Feynman never let it go quiet, and neither should you.